The difference between reacting and responding. A reaction is an unconscious action. It's a kind of immediate reflex where we don't do any processing of how we actually want to engage with the situation and what the healthiest or most productive next step could be. A response, on the other hand, can be carefully considered. It's a mindful action where we observe our own thoughts and feelings in the situation and perhaps those of anyone else involved, and consciously choose what we want to do next. In many ways, you could say that reacting is an unsophisticated way or interacting that puts you in an out-of-control kind of place. To respond rather than react requires a degree of maturity and mastery of one's emotions. Triggers cause reactions, and often when we react in an unthinking way, it's because a situation has pushed a hot button or trigger that relates to an unresolved past negative experience. These triggers can put us into what psychotherapist Pete Walker calls an emotional flashback, where we're no longer present and in a mindful state, but are instead emotionally taken back to a place of wounding or trauma. So, why is it important to respond rather than react? Taking responsibility for mastering or response ability means having an awareness about our relationship with the situation itself. What I mean by this is our internal dialogue, where we can ask ourselves, how do I feel about this? How do I want to respond? What outcome do I want? And what response will give me the best chance of getting this outcome? This allows us to make conscious choices about how we connect and communicate with others, and it also allows us to stay present with our emotions tuned into what is actually happening in the moment, rather than our emotions whirling around in an unconscious response to past hurts and traumas. So I'm going to give an example. I was working with a young woman last year. She had a father who had some big challenges around anger. He would go into an explosive rage if she was even a minute late for something. He would rant about respect and make her feel incredibly small and ashamed that she would dare to waste his time by keeping him waiting for even a minute. It didn't matter if it wasn't her fault and whether she'd been on a train that had been delayed. If the clock hand was more than a few seconds past that exact time where she was due to meet him, she would have to apologize profusely and calm his stress with a long speech about how much she respected him and his time. I'm sure that, like a lot of those kinds of things, this was an inherited trauma that had been passed down to him from one of his early caretakers. In any case, it took a lot of self-development work on her part to stop reacting with severe judgment to anyone who's even late for her. She had to learn to master her emotions and her sense of they don't respect me, to be able to respond without unnecessarily high stress on her part when someone is late. She does have good boundaries, so of course she appreciates an apology and explanation when someone is late, and they won't arrive finding her in a high state of, total triggered reactivity. Another personal example, this is my one, is when a few weeks ago I was speaking to my daughter about some rather exciting news in our family. And then she made a comment that had me feeling very triggered. I had, an instant reaction to this and just wanted to hit that red button on my phone and terminate the call. I want to explain what happens when we are triggered like this. We can be having a pleasant conversation with someone and they say something or we say something, and then there's this unpleasant trigger. As this happens, there's a chemical reaction in the body, and we release stress chemicals or stress hormones in the bloodstream, one of them being cortisol. As this happens, we literally exit our rational brain and go into our limbic brain, often referred to as the reptilian or primitive brain. It's the part of the brain that's responsible for survival, drive, and instinct, the fight and flight response. So the next time this happens to you, notice how it feels in your body and become aware of where you feel this in your body. I generally feel it here in my throat. Others describe feeling it in their head, their chest, the pit of the stomach. Just notice what you notice and notice that this chemical is the response. that hormonal response as it releases. And at that moment, we have a choice. So stop, breathe, and think of your response. When this happened to me a few weeks ago, I managed to stop, breathe, and then I said, I'm feeling really triggered right now, and I'd like to perhaps talk about this at another time. So let's stop the conversation. I'll chat to you later tonight. Rather than going into a triggered state of defensiveness, which I used to do as a reflex, I now take time to process what meaning I'm giving the situation and to try and get curious about why this is a trigger for me. Of course, I'm human too, and sometimes I do still react, but generally respond more than react by applying the following information I'm going to share with you. With any trigger situation, it takes a good 20 minutes for those stress hormones to dissipate in the bloodstream. So no good is going to come from a conversation trying to make sense of things. You will notice a complete mind shift, and that your response will be different if you take a break. I don't mean that you should exit completely and leave the other person wondering what's happened. Announce that you feel triggered and that you would like to discuss this a little later or sooner after 20 minutes when you feel calmer. So go for a short walk, make a cup of tea or coffee, listen to some music, and get into a calmer state. Mastering the art of responding rather than reacting is learning how to respond, and it's an important relationship skill. In my video, How to Respond Rather Than React, I take you through a structured, guided framework to help you master the art of responsibility. If you'd like to sharpen your skill set in this area and gain some helpful mindfulness tools, do click on the link to that video. With practice, this skill can become second nature and can be a powerful way of connecting more deeply with yourself and others. I love sharing my tools and tips and guidance with you and supporting you on your journey to thriving relationships. Please subscribe to my channel by clicking on the subscribe button so we can travel this path together, and I look forward to seeing you in my next video.